Hey everybody, welcome to another Facebook Live. Thank you for joining us. It's going to be a fun night, a fun topic, lots to learn. We all have to learn these things. So I am Patty Dorito and I am the owner and founder of Holistic Healing Atlanta. And part of the reason I started this business is because I wanted to be able to integrate the body, the mind, and the soul to help people to be their best version of themselves, to have optimal health. So tonight's subject is how to fall in love, be in love, and stay in love. So it's pretty easy to say, I do. It's to walk down the aisle and say, I do. So by the way, that is a picture of my daughter and her husband. She got married last year. Anyway, but do you remember falling in love? What made you fall in love? And in the beginning, it's exciting and everything's new and it's easy. It's very easy to be in that first spot. And then there's this spark, and you talked all the time and you couldn't get enough of your boyfriend or your girlfriend, and you spent like every free moment you possibly could get in there. But what gets in the way of staying in love? And it's a really difficult subject because there's a lot, it's complicated. So when you get married, you bring two suitcases. One is the stuff that you bring, and the other is the junk that you bring. And so what is that junk? So it's childhood wounds. It's previous relationship breaches. Maybe you've been hurt by a boyfriend or girlfriend in the past, or a husband or wife and an ex. It can be addictions. It can be your cell phone. These things are really dastardly. If I could get rid of these things, I think we would save a lot of relationships. And then busyness. We live in the Atlanta area. For those here, it's a busy, busy place, and it's hard to get focused and stay present. There's selfishness. And then there's a part of us that we don't understand our own needs, and we also don't understand the needs of our significant other. So whether it's a boyfriend at this time, girlfriend, husband, wife, partner, okay? And it's easy just to blame and then shut down. It's like, it's your fault and I'm going to shut down. So drifting apart in a relationship is actually pretty normal. So we have closeness, then we kind of go out, and then we have to pull back in. But what happens is a lot of times we don't pull back in. But if we stay close all the time, the marriage would implode. The relationship would implode. So I just want to say that's pretty normal. And then there's stages of relationships. So the first is the honeymoon phase. Everything is good. It's new and exciting. Differences are insurmountable. But and that honeymoon stage can actually end before a couple is married. And then after, or it could last in, a lot of times it ends around the 2-year mark, which is often the first baby arrives. So people will often divorce at that time, and instead of saying this is normal and moving into this disillusionment phase, people divorce and they say, you know what, I didn't sign up for this. Maybe I made a mistake. So part of the disillusionment is like little things, even like the shoes that are left in the hallway and you trip over them. But the disillusionment phase is sort of all the things that you didn't work on before you got married. The next phase is the working stage. And that's where you have to start working on all those things that didn't get resolved. And it's tough. And by the way, it takes a couple an average of 7 years of discord in their marriage before they get any help. So I encourage you, don't wait that long, because there's a lot of hurt and damage that goes on in those 7 years. The final stage is the acceptance stage. And that's where you just sort of accept the other person as they are. Now, it's not linear. So as soon as you do the honeymoon stage, then disillusionment, working, it kind of bounces back and forth all the time. So, again, when you move into disillusionment, then you have to say, okay, now I have to work. I'm disillusioned. Okay. So how do you go into the working stage? So part of the working stage is carving time out for each other. We're busy. We're very busy people. We have jobs, we have children, we have traffic. And even now with COVID, things have shifted a lot with that busyness and stuff. And we're doing a lot of distractions we can do a lot of distractions for ourselves. But I would say, carving out time. If you're a couple with young children, when are you spending time together? It's important that couples carve out time to spend with each other, because you don't eat once a month or once a year. You eat every day, and you have to have some contact with your spouse every day. Now, maybe you're not going on a date every night. I'm not saying to the exclusion of your children, but you have to be able to spend time with your children. So some of the things I would say is put that phone away. That's a big problem with a lot of couples, the phone rings or it dings and buzzes, and then one person just starts answering it. And that is basically that phone says, I'm not interested in you. I'm going to be more interested in what's there. So put that phone away. So even like during the day, I just said put your phones away, but you can send little love notes on your texts with each other, or you can leave little sticky notes in their lunch or on their computer. We all want to be thought of. And then it's showing a lot of appreciation for each other. I stayed home with my children when they were younger, but I love to hear that I was appreciated for the sacrifice I made, because it looks like it's pretty easy, cushy job staying home, but it's a lot of work. And so hearing my husband say, thank you, or, good dinner, or I really appreciate that you went and picked up my dry cleaning, or something like that, that's really, it makes a difference. Another thing is setting goals. What are your goals as a married couple? Where do you want to be in 5 years or 10 years or in 20 years? So I encourage couples to get away once a year, even just for an overnight, so that the couple can say, a state of the union, so to speak, kind of meeting. So where are we? What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? And where do we want to go? Where do we want to be in a year from now as a couple? Because it doesn't just happen. Couples that thrive are purposeful in their relationships. Okay, so we have the 5 languages of love. And this is based on Gary Chapman's work. And Gary Chapman proposes there's 5 love languages. And this is how we give love and receive love. Oftentimes the way we give it is the way we want it to be received. So the first one is quality time. That's spending time without distractions. It's not like sitting next to each other watching television. It's just like, I'm speaking to you. I'm looking in your eyes. I matter. You matter. Gifts. The next one is acts of services. And that is doing things. Now, that used to be my husband's. I think it still is. So when the children were little, I knew that if I had dinner ready when he came home and had the toys picked up from the door into where he sat, that meant a lot to him. Because every day he would call me from work before he left and said, is there anything I could pick up from the store for you? So it's an act of service for me. And then there's touch. And this isn't sex. This is just a non-sexual touch. And then words of affirmation, letting the other person know they matter, you appreciate them, you affirm who they are as a person. If my husband brought me flowers or a gift every single day, I would say thank you, but I wouldn't feel loved by him. So my love language, my primary one, is quality time. I want him to sit next to me and talk. I don't need to talk all night, because he runs out of words by 8:30 in the morning. I just need him to spend a little bit of time with me, seeing how I am. And my secondary is touching me. So if he holds my hand, puts his arm around me, puts his hand on my leg, I feel really loved. So it's spending some time. I encourage you to get the book, or you can probably Google Gary Chapman and the 5 love languages. Now, often men say, well, the way they show love to their wife is that they provide financially for them. And that's great. But a lot of the women will say, well, I don't feel loved, because then the man just says, I'm done. I provided a house and a lifestyle, and this is all good. But it's important to a lot of women that if that's That's not the only way they want to feel love. Okay. The other way that men often show love is through the sexual act. And I tell the women that sometimes men don't have the words to express how they feel, but only in a very physical, intimate way. And being able to explain that to a woman, because us women have been told something different about, like, men are horny or they just want sex, and, it's all about a release, but that's not really true from most men. Okay. In relationships, it's also important you have pursuers and withdrawers. So when somebody doesn't feel connected in the relationship, they're going to do one of two things. They're either going to withdraw, and like a turtle, kind of, I have to feel safe, or they're going to pursue, and they're going to go after. They can poke. And typically you have one of each, not always. Again, not always this, but usually it's the women who are pursuers. And so they're poking. They're saying, do you see me? I need you to be in relationship with me. But what happens is when you're poking, the men or the withdrawers feel criticized and not good enough, and I'll never be good enough, and not measuring up. But when the withdrawer withdraws, the other person feels alone and abandoned and rejected. So you have this little bit of an infinity loop. And so it's important for the couple to say, what's going on here? I feel alone, or, like, what's going on over there? Or is this one of these times where you need to be alone? Okay. Another area that has to be addressed too, and by the way, I do this in my therapy sessions. So if you come to me, we'll be going through all this stuff, is your family of origin. How did your mom and dad, whether they were an intact marriage or divorced or separated, but how did your parents show love? How did they get along when they had differences? How did they show forgiveness? How did they show affection? So if I come from a very demonstrative family and love touching and stuff, and I marry someone who in their family culture didn't have any of the touch, it's going to be a problem, because I'm craving it and that other person doesn't naturally give it because it doesn't do that. Their family he or she didn't learn that. If your parents had an argument, did they shout at each other, or did they withdraw and go into their own corners? I have people who say, my parents never fought. Well, it's hard to believe that you'd put two people together and they never had any kind of differences. So they just avoided, probably, and swept it under the carpet. But that doesn't really work in marriages. You have to bring those up. Okay, so the next thing is the 7 desires of every heart. And this is based on the book, 7 Desires of Every Heart, by Mark and Deborah Laaser. So the first one is to be heard and to be understood. And so what does that mean? To be heard and to be understood by your romantic partner. And that's to be known. That you know what I'm thinking, you know what I'm feeling, you know my needs, my struggles, you know my weaknesses. And to be understood and not judged, because we all have our strengths and weaknesses, but feeling judged, we're going to shut down. We're not going to be feeling safe. The next one is to feel affirmed, to be approved, to be recognized, to be thanked, to be appreciated, and to be encouraged. The next one is to be blessed. And that really means that we're worthy of being loved, that someone is proud of us. And that's a blessing that the other person, really, it's because the other person matters so much in our marriage. That's really important to know that we're worthy of love. Next one, to feel safe. And this is like physical safety, emotional safety, sexual safety, spiritual safety, mental safety. When we feel safe, that means that we're also allowed to be ourselves. We can make mistakes without someone criticizing us or putting us down or shaming us, and we can reach our potential. But the first one is that has to feel safe is the physical, because if a person feels physical safety, that's a prerequisite for emotional and spiritual safety. Next one, to be touched. So there's two kinds of touches here. One is non-sexual, to be held and to be comforted, not in a sexual way, but just to be held. And you think about little babies, they want to be comforted. There was an experiment that in the 20th century that Harry Harlow did with rhesus monkeys. And they put these little baby monkeys in these cages without a mother, and they provided like a food for them, but no comfort. They had to stop the experiment because the little baby monkeys died, because we need as human beings to be touched. And then those monkeys, they failed to thrive, and they had social deficits, and they were reclusive and clingy. The other part about being touched, it's a way that oxytocin is released. It's a hormone that bonds us. Okay, the sixth desire of the heart is to be chosen. And that's to be cherished, to be in a special relationship. And like, if you think about chosen, do you remember maybe on the recess ground that you weren't chosen, or you were the last to be chosen on a team? That's really awful. That rejection goes deep and hurts. People talk about that they didn't see, they weren't important, they weren't seen, they weren't chosen. And the last one is to be included. And that is, included is like being part of a bigger picture than ourselves, having a bigger purpose, a larger purpose, that we matter in the world, and that we're just not some random person. So those are the 7 desires of the heart. Now, what happens if they're not met? You can't redo, and you can't make your parents give these things to you. But in your romantic relationship, some of the stuff can be met. You can heal these wounds. And some of it is, we're also living with a human being, so it is a little bit hard because they're not perfect. But when these needs are not being met, we often make decisions, unwise decisions, to try to meet these desires by ourselves. And just going back, when needs aren't met, they affect us deeply. They go very deeply, and these unmet needs can also stir up a lot of strong emotions. And a lot of those emotions are unconscious. We might feel angry, but we don't know where it's coming from, because maybe our husband or wife walked in the door and walked right by us. We don't feel seen or appreciated. And so now we can get like anger. But before their anger, there's some feelings that happen. Like, do I feel dismissed or unloved or not important? Because that's really what's underneath of it. So the anger, we can either blame the other person, or I often see people blaming and being angry at themselves. Like, what's wrong with me? Why am I like this? Almost like an immediate snap, knee-jerk reaction when something happens. I'm to blame. I did this. So I would just say that it takes a little bit of time to slow yourselves down and say, like, what needs in your childhood were not met, and what is it that you want, and how do you go about it now? Some people say, I'm too needy. My boyfriend, my girlfriend, my husband, my wife says, I'm too needy of a person. And I'm just going to say that we're not too needy. Maybe we didn't have needs met, but if the other person can't provide that, sometimes we have to say, well, why is that other person not able to meet that needs? And in an ideal world, that other person would say, well, what keeps me from providing this stuff? And that's their junk, So both of the people have to kind of own their stuff and say, what's my part? If you guys have if people have a fight, a couple, it's really good to go back and say, okay, this is what happened. It's almost like looking at old football tapes. You're looking frame by frame. Where did we go off the rails? So saying, okay, what happened? What's my part? Because it's really easy to say, well, you did this, or you looked at this way, or you used this tone. But in the end, it's really about saying, this is my part. And the other person, if they confess and say, this is my part, it just makes it better when both can own their own stuff and then apologize. But so anger is one way people react to unmet needs, but there's also like loneliness and emptiness and social isolation. People can fall into a lot of negativity. And like when they're feeling so lonely, it's like, what are they needing? What is their need that's not been met? And then how do you go about that? So, and some people, when they're looking for what do I need, they look in all the wrong places. So it can be their job. They want more money. They want more popularity, drugs, alcohol. Sometimes people spend a lot of time and energy, physical fitness, and there's nothing wrong with any of those things. But if that's the sort of their God at the moment, that can push people away. Okay, so asking yourself, what are my core needs and what needs were not met? And that's also talking with your spouse or boyfriend, girlfriend, what you learned in your family and why you're reacting, why you did. And especially if there's been trauma in the family, that makes a big difference. There's another part too. If there's addiction that's going on, addiction renders somebody unavailable. And I don't care what kind of addiction, whether it's drugs, alcohol, gambling, pornography, whatever it is, it just so isolates that person, and they're not capable of being in relationship with another because they're thinking about the next hit, the next bottle they're going to drink, the next porn site they're going to look at. So they're emotionally unavailable. Okay, so how do you go about finding what you need? And so it's introspection, but people can't do that unless they slow down. And we live in a busy place. COVID has slowed us down some, but then people are so anxious, their brains are wound up. So it's being able to say, all right, I'm going to go, like for me, I sit on my back porch in the morning and I hear the birds. I watch, it's pretty in the backyard with trees and flowers and birds. So I just listen to what's going on to the world. And I think for me, it's a partly prayer time, just being quiet and listening and saying, okay, what's going on with me? Journaling. I love journaling, and there are people who journal, there's people who don't journal, but journaling, if you can get it out of your head, down your arm on a piece of paper, and it's better to physically write with a pen and paper than to type. It accesses a different part of your brain. So journaling, like what needs aren't met, journal about it. What was it like when you're 5 years old and something happened? Just start writing, and memories will start coming back. So you're bringing it from the unconscious to the conscious. For me, prayer is a great time to asking, Lord, how do you see me? What needs do I have? What needs are not met? And I live with a faulted person. Don't tell my husband that. But, I have to also then go to God and say, how do you see me? And when did you feel alone? Oh, the Garden of Gethsemane, where everybody abandoned you. Oh, okay. So for me, it's being able to understand that somebody else has gone through that. But that's for me. And then be curious about ourselves. What makes us tick? Why do we react? If somebody uses a certain tone with us, why do we react that way? Why do we have certain sensitivities? And then as human beings, we're hardwired to love and be loved, and we're not designed to be self-sufficient. So the next thing is taking a risk, reaching for the other and asking for what we need. Now, you say, I'm making myself really vulnerable, and I asked my spouse, I need you to hold me. I need you to hug me. I need you to not judge me right now. And the person just goes, okay, then that's where you need to come see me, because we have to work with both of the couple, because something's going on with the other person that they don't know how to love back. Yeah. So then notice about yourself too. When are you open and when do you get defensive and shut down? I definitely have some triggers, and I have to take care of those. So I know if I'm hungry and if I'm tired, I'm going to be more reactive. So I have to take good care of my sleep patterns and eating on a regular basis. Okay. I think it's really important that prayer as a couple, to ask God, the Lord, for times where we can together have a spiritual goal. Asking for forgiveness, owning our own stuff. I mean, that's pretty hard to say, I'm sorry that I was a jerk with you. Will you forgive me? And then here's a real big risky question is, how have I hurt you in the past? And then if somebody risks that, to be that vulnerable to say, how have I hurt you? Then give the response. You don't want to give them a fire hose answer back and just blast them with every last thing to say. But it's an important conversation. Sometimes those conversations are done in my office because they're pretty painful, because inadvertently people have done things or not done. One of the things I can just say that a lot of people, when they get angry or really sad or frustrated, they just go away. They shut down and go away. And they think, well, I'm better because at least I'm not yelling like my spouse is doing it. But that's the very negative, damaging response, is to shut down and move away from the situation. It's also important about criticism. And people are very tender when it comes to criticism, particularly with our spouse, because they matter. People say, at work, I can take it, doesn't matter. But when it comes at home, it hurts so much. Well, that's because you have a lot to lose. At work, who cares? It's just a work person. But at home, with this person that loves you and knows you, it's really hard. And so we have to be careful with our words. I have to say, honestly, that's where I fall down a lot. I have to be careful with my words because I can be blunt and direct, and it can be hurtful. So that's kind of like what I would just say. I don't know if there's any questions in the audience that you might want to know. You can contact me through my website, which is listed up there. You can call me. My phone number's up there. You can leave a voicemail. So let's see, no questions right now. So thank you for tuning in. It was great having all of you, and I hope to do this in another 2 weeks. And by the way, if you have a subject that you would like me to address, I'm all ears. So whether it's therapy kind of questions, or nutrition and wellness, or trauma, because I also do a lot of trauma work, feel free to call me. So have a good evening. And again, thank you.